I would be interested what you think are the advantages, disadvantages of going into that field, and what would be necessary to make it possible to bring it into, let's say, the corporate world.
I think there are two implications in that. The first is that it, just as you mentioned, psychedelics made it into the business world, but the second implication is that psychedelics made it more into society. Yeah, it's more publicly available, and this is a huge topic, which I am very passionate about passionate in thinking about it. I think that it's important to have some clear guidelines, for like societal integration. Or do you want to talk about the business area first?
I'd love to come in on that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if I'm not jumping in, Marcel.
You can jump in first, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So for me, two things came up when you asked us that question, Julian. The first one was the topic of consent. So it's wonderful. There's a thought to bring this into a workplace wellness environment or coaching environment, but the consent of everybody that's going to take part in that, I think, is of paramount importance. But then it comes back to this whole concept of preparation and preparing people for what they're going to be entering, because maybe, what are we going in to do here? And it could be that we're all going into, we're going to use psychedelics to brainstorm around this idea that we have within our organization. Wonderful. But we know that when you do work in these altered states, that way more than that comes up. So are people prepared for the unknown? And what are the support systems in place to cope with that? Because we know it's not just a linear route to get from A to B when we do this work. So it's a fascinating area, but you're stepping into very vulnerable and personal territory often when we're doing this. So what's the protective cushioning, shall we say, around you as an employee when you go in to do something like that? And are you prepared? Are you prepared, and are your colleagues prepared? And is your workplace prepared to support you with doing this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think dose plays a huge role here. Because the higher the dose, the more the uncertainty about what's going to happen now.
True.
And I reckon larger corporations, they're not going to be embracing that kind of certainty, because in a way you're opening Pandora's box. Because how well do you know your employee really? How well does that employee really know themselves? To make a decision whether, this is going to be a creative, inspirational team building exercise versus this is going to be climbing the mountain of pain for 1,000 years. We really just don't know, and we can't predict it. So I think with larger corporations, that's not really going to be a thing.
But was a larger one.
Was it? Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And were they talking about? Do you know what dose they were talking about, Julie? Was this like doing a full-on psychedelic experience at a high dose, or was it a microdosing brainstorm or something?
No, I don't have really the details, but it was MDMA and psilocybin-assisted therapy. Okay. So I suppose it would have been the high dose. And for me, it was more the question, like, what is the aim also of the corporation to incorporate that? Because is it then instrumentalized, like mindfulness as well, to make the people more efficient and to be less sick at the workplace? Or is it really about helping develop a person as their personality is and discover themselves, and also taking into account that they might leave the company because they realize this is not my path anymore?
You got to be really confident as a company really to offer that.
Yeah. So definitely, if you offer it as a corporation, you have to consider a return on investment. So definitely this is into play, and I'm very hesitant because of that. What I really like is to transfer the effects of psychedelics, let's say just self-insight, into practical application in different life areas, as I mentioned before, business, private life. And I think, so what I'm aiming for is to probably in the mid of next year launching a project where we build up these existential learning rooms, where we have deep experiences with psychedelics also in the Netherlands or in Portugal or other places where it's legal, and then to have an ongoing integration that is way more than the integration nowadays, where you have 2 or 3 sessions, and to really talk about how to concrete and long-term apply these insights and enhanced self-access that you experience after psychedelic ingestions, or psychedelic experiences. So I think there has to be really some maybe companies or instances that have or places, spaces, let's say spaces, this is way more neutral, where people can come, have psychedelic experiences, and are supported in a coaching related manner in long term when they want. So I think it's also a process of the next 5 to 7 years, optimistically.
And I think this is where the paper comes in again, because the larger corporation, any corporation really, will probably want and need to create some level of certainty that this is going to have this or that effect. And we will need a lot more research. That's what they base this on, what they base the kind of certainty on, because in this Western world, that's still the best way of creating knowledge that we know of. Not watertight, but certainly it's an accepted field, right? So when we create more research around psychedelics-assisted coaching or coaching-assisted psychedelic experiences, maybe with a focus on leadership or authenticity in leadership or creativity or inspiration, I mean, that's already starting. A colleague of mine, Hanane, she did a dissertation around leaders' experiences of psychedelics and how that's affecting their well-being and their experience of leadership. So I can see that have profound effects on how a leader is showing up in the company. I can see it have profound effects on where a company is going. I can also see the dark side here in terms of there's power involved when an organization is offering this. And for those who listen, I put offering in quotations, because when someone with power is offering something, it may not feel like an offer that you can refuse. So I've seen pictures of Esalen, the retreat center space in San Francisco, just outside. And that was under new management. There was this whole article. Nobody mentioned any psychedelics, but that was very clear that picture there was an ayahuasca setup. And I'm like, I can definitely see tech startups taking their leadership team to Esalen to do an ayahuasca ceremony. And it'll probably be really difficult for someone who's critical about it or doesn't quite feel, but they want to belong, and they don't want to say no because they might be jeopardizing their career if they said no. And that's something very ethically concerning. I think that's very wrong. So there's a lot of things to consider if you thinking about introducing or offering or inviting your staff to take part in psychedelic experiences. It's critical to really think this through, and I think it can be risky. So I think the future, there will always be companies who will be doing it, some more ethically and some less ethically. I'm hoping that the people who want to introduce this into companies, they work with a good coach who really helps them to think about it. And I think it would help to work with a coach who knows a little bit about psychedelics and their effects and maybe the research. And again, it's super important that we create more research so that hopefully people who are considering offering these tools, if we wanted to call them that for the moment, in the corporate space, they're probably more tools than medicines. In coaching, they're probably more resources and processes rather than medicines to go heal. Undoubtedly, many people in the corporate space need some healing in order to do better work. So again, it can be a blurry line. But yeah, that's where I see it going. Hopefully, ideally, there's going to be a lot more research and a lot more interest, but hopefully with some hesitation and some critical engagement in what are the pros and the cons.
And maybe this just comes to that point that what we're talking about here is one option for people who want to grow, right? It's not the option. Yes, it's a thing that's gathering a lot more attention at the moment, but it's certainly not for everybody. And maybe this company this hypothetical company we're talking about, it's just on their list of possible options that, you could go and have existential coaching, you could go and have this, and you could go and have that, because it's more just what is right for Marcel is not right for Nigel, and it's not right for Julia. So it's just having the suite of available options for those of us that want to be better versions of ourselves.